Well, my full name is Benedict Rogers. We established Hong Kong Watch in December 2017, and the reason for doing so is that a group of us, myself and a few other people, were increasingly concerned about the erosion of freedom, the rule of law and autonomy in Hong Kong. And we felt there was a real need for people outside Hong Kong, and particularly in the UK, to speak up for Hong Kong, and especially because the UK has a particular responsibility to Hong Kong, both a moral responsibility given our history, but also a legal responsibility under the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which is still valid until 2047, that gives the UK a responsibility to monitor the situation in Hong Kong. And it's important to remember that when Hong Kong was handed back to China 21 years ago, promises were made to the people of Hong Kong that the Hong Kong way of life, basic freedoms, the rule of law would be protected, and that Hong Kong would have a high degree of autonomy. And we think that's increasingly under threat, and therefore there's a need for an organisation to speak out for Hong Kong. But I think it also is important for the whole international community to pay attention to that, because if China regards an international treaty that it signed with Britain and is lodged at the United Nations, if it regards that as now irrelevant and out of date, what does that say about its obligations under other international treaties? I had actually lived in Hong Kong from 1997 until 2002, the first 5 years after the handover, and I'd been back to Hong Kong many times since 2002, but I hadn't been back for a few years. And as I was starting to get more involved in speaking up for Hong Kong and thinking about setting up Hong Kong Watch, and I'd been involved in speaking up particularly for a number of high-profile peaceful protesters in Hong Kong who had been imprisoned, especially Joshua Wong, Nathan Law and Alex Chow, the leaders of the Umbrella movement. So I'd been more and more active, and I felt it was important, therefore, to go back to Hong Kong so that I could get an update from people firsthand and meet people. A few days before I was due to leave for Hong Kong, I was actually in Bangkok for other reasons, and I was preparing to travel from Bangkok to Hong Kong. I received a telephone call from a British Member of Parliament who I know well, who told me that he had received a call from the Chinese embassy, who had found out that I was planning to go to Hong Kong and were very angry and asked him to tell me not to go. I took advice on this from a number of key people in Hong Kong and also other political figures in the UK, and unanimously everybody said you must still go to Hong Kong because, first of all, it's quite likely that the Chinese embassy are just trying to intimidate you, and that actually when you arrive in Hong Kong the decision will be in the hands of Hong Kong immigration under Hong Kong's autonomy, and therefore you should have no problem getting into Hong Kong. But if in the unlikely event the Chinese actually are going to intervene directly to stop you going to Hong Kong, the world needs to know, because this is another example of the erosion of Hong Kong's freedoms and autonomy. So for those reasons I went ahead. I arrived in Hong Kong thinking that on balance I probably would be okay and I'd be able to get in. And I arrived at the immigration counter and they put my name into the computer, and they then took me aside. I have to say the Hong Kong officials treated me perfectly well and very courteously, and it was obvious to me that they did not want to be doing this, but they had orders directly from Beijing. Anyway, after about an hour they'd asked me some questions, and after about an hour they put me back on a plane to Bangkok, and I was unable to get into Hong Kong. Subsequently, there have been various attempts to ask the Hong Kong government whether that was a one-off or whether it's a permanent ban, and the Hong Kong government has not answered that question. So I don't know whether I'm able in the future to go back to Hong Kong or not.